Today is going to be a great day because we're going to be talking all about crocheted blankets, afghans, and throws. No matter what you call them, we're gonna talk about them. Hi, I'm Elise and I just finished this gorgeous crochet blanket and I'm going to share all the details with you, but I've also crocheted other blankets and I've picked up a trick or two along the way. But before we get started, I know that some of you are hardcore crochet blanket makers and I want to hear from you. Please put your best tips, your best tricks in the comment section below so that we can all learn from you. I recently got a message from one of my all-time favorite crochet designers. Can you guess who it is? I knew you'd guess it. It's Tony from TL Yarn Crafts, and she was reaching out to see if little old me, wanted to test out her brand new yarn, Happy Place. Tony has teamed up with Hubby Yarn to create the most gorgeous yarn, and it's perfect for crocheted blankets. Happy Place is a number 3 lightweight yarn and it's 50% merino wool and 50% cotton. And here's why that combination is so perfect. Merino wool is famous for its softness, but cotton adds that bit of strength so that you can crochet anything you want with this yarn. These are 100-gram balls, and that's a lot of yarn. And they come in 20 gorgeous colors with 20 matching melange colors as well, which gives it a very textured, heathered look. It's machine washable, but you do need to lay it flat to dry. As soon as I opened the box and saw all of these incredibly rich, gorgeous colors, it literally took my breath away. And because it's Tony's brand new yarn, I knew that I wanted to choose one of her designs to make something with it. And as I was looking for all of her patterns that call for a lightweight yarn, I discovered the Quinn blanket and I knew this is going to be the project I'm going to make. What I love about the Quinn blanket is that you have these large blocks of color, and that's where these gorgeous shades and hues really shine. And I will say this was a totally addicting project. It took me maybe a week, maybe a little over a week to complete the whole blanket. It's a lap size blanket and it's also called a baby blanket on her website. It's a free pattern, by the way, and you have the video tutorial, which is fantastic. But I didn't want to do anything else but crochet and make this gorgeous blanket. It was so much fun to work on. But the one thing that I do want to tell you that is so unique about this blanket is that these large blocks of color, you don't have to seam them together. She has a seamless join that she shows on the video, and it's so perfect. That's why this project is so addictive, because you have very little ends to weave in and it's just so pretty. And I know a lot of it is because I used her gorgeous yarns, and you can really see that these colors are magnificent. I cannot get over it. The yarn just released, so make sure to check the link in the description box below to get your hands on it. And I am just so proud of Tony. Having your own yarn brand is a pretty big deal, and it couldn't happen to anyone better. Okay, now that I'm done gushing all about Tony and the Happy Place yarn, let's get to the tips. One of the most important details that I have found when I am planning a crochet blanket project is to make sure that I have enough yarn. It's incredibly frustrating to get through a project and realize I'm running out of yarn. Now I need to see, do I have any more in my stash? Do I need to go buy any more? Is it discontinued? Will they have the same colors? Nobody wants to be in that position. Now, if you're using a pattern, it will likely share how much yardage you need to purchase to be able to make the blanket. But if you're making a blanket on your own or the pattern doesn't state how much you need, it can be really tricky to calculate all of that. But I've got a couple of tools for you. I found this fantastic chart from Lion brand that lists how much yardage you need if you want to make a baby blanket or a full-size afghan, and it breaks it down into yarn weight. This is such valuable information to have. It'll give you a starting place so that you know you're at least in the ballpark somewhere. But you can also find different yardage calculators online, and I found one from Jimmy Bean's Wool. Although it's called a knitting calculator, I played around with this a little while and made sure that when I put in the information on the Jimmy Bean's Wool calculator that it was around the same yardage as the Lion brand chart. And I'm happy to report it was. The estimates were very close. So if you want something a little more exact, I think the Jimmy Bean's Wool would be a great place to start. But if you're just looking for some general guidelines, the Lion brand chart is great. Let's take a moment to check in with today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform for creative-minded people. They have thousands of amazing classes in so many different creative areas like crocheting, knitting, and sewing, just to name a few. What's great is that all Skillshare classes are online. You can learn from the comforts of your own home, and they're all ad-free. One of my favorite Skillshare classes is by one of my favorite crochet designers, Tony Lipsy of TL Yarn Crafts, and it's Modern Crochet Essentials for Getting Started. This is a fantastic class for total beginners, but it's also great for those of us who have a little experience under our belts and we just want to polish up our existing skills. This class contains 14 different lessons that will give you confidence in your crocheting. One of my favorite lessons is about blocking and aftercare. I get a lot of questions on my channel about this, and this lesson explains not only how to do it, but why it's important. And what's even better is that the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description box below will get a 1-month free trial to Skillshare. Make sure to check out all of the other crochet classes as well. You'll find amigurumi classes, crochet jewelry classes, mosaic crochet, just to name a few. There's something for everyone. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Another important thing to consider are dye lots when you are going to crochet a blanket. When you look at your yarn label, it will typically tell you what the dye lot number is. And here's a great explanation of what dye lots are from Stitch and Story. A lot number relates to the yarn dyeing process. It's a unique identification number assigned to a batch of dyed yarn during manufacturing and stamped on a yarn's label. Every batch or lot of yarn dyed at the same time in the same vat receives the exact same lot number. This matters because there can be slight and not so slight variations in color when choosing the same yarn color but having different dye lots. This is why planning out a project can be very important. I have had the unfortunate experience of choosing colors and not having the same dye lot, and that can be really frustrating. I didn't notice it at first because I was actually knitting a little sweater for a little bunny rabbit and it was in the dark, and I thought, oh, it's the same color, it's perfect. And then in the daylight, I noticed, oh my goodness, these are not the same color. Well, technically they were the same color, but they weren't the same dye lot, and it was a noticeable difference. So that's why that planning, making sure you have enough yarn, is really important. That way you don't end up with a situation like that where you have different dye lots and you're left going, oh my goodness, what am I gonna do now? The next tip I have is about how to choose your color palette. This is when the fun and sometimes the stress comes in. If you haven't already done so, make sure to check out the Crochet Studio app. This is especially helpful if you like a little bit of help when you're choosing the yarn colors for your blankets. It takes out all of the hard work. It really is amazing. I talked more in detail about this app recently in a video called The Best Yarns for Granny Squares, which I'll leave a link to in the description box below, but I'll give you the short version here. This app can help you choose the perfect color combinations. You can also put a reference photo into the app and it will choose colors based on that photo. If you found something of a garden and you loved all those colors and you wanted to make a crocheted blanket with those specific colors, it will choose them for you. It also has tons of pre-designed color palettes to choose from, and you can look through and look for seasons and moods, and it will show you all of these different gorgeous color combinations. When I was trying to choose the colors for my Quinn blanket, I had all of these gorgeous Happy Place yarns to choose from, but I was really struggling because I couldn't decide if I wanted to go with darker colors closer to the fall or if I wanted to do light springy colors. I kept putting different color combinations together on the floor. I would put 4 or 5 colors together and then I might add another one, or then I would make another color palette and grab a yarn from one other color palette to see how it all looked together. And that was actually a really fun thing to do. But this app is fantastic and it takes out all the guesswork. I ultimately decided to go with a late summer color palette. And the reason why I feel like this is a late summer palette is I've got these gorgeous pinks and yellows and the greens in here, but I've also got some white and some blue. And the thing that I feel like really makes this look like a late summer blanket is this pop of this gorgeous chocolatey brown. Surprisingly enough, the leaves have started to turn just a little bit and I'm seeing little brown leaves scattered around my yard, and I felt like this just represented the time of year that I'm making this blanket, and I think that the colors all look so gorgeous together. This is one of my favorite crochet blankets I've ever done. My next tip is to focus on a solid foundation. I recently learned a little trick when I was making my viral crochet TikTok hacks video, and I have no idea how I had never picked up on this tip before, but it's now one that I use for the Quinn blanket, and I will do this going forward. And the tip is to just use one crochet hook size larger than the rest of the pattern. The Quinn blanket called for a 5mm crochet hook, so for my beginning chain, I used a 6mm crochet hook, and it is a game changer for me. Because my chain tension is typically tighter than the rest of my tension, my projects were looking like this. But now that I use one crochet hook size larger, my tension is uniform throughout the entire project, and it looks so good. Another thing that you can do is a foundation chain if you want to combine your chain with the first row of your work. And there are tons of different YouTube tutorials for how to do that, but it will also give you a really nice foundation and everything will look beautiful. The choice is really up to you, but by focusing on that foundation, you are setting yourself up for success with your crocheted blanket. One of the crocheted blanket tips that I learned the hard way was to keep all of the pattern details neatly organized. Unfortunately, one of my crochet projects sits in perpetual whipland, whip meaning works in progress, whipland, is because I did not write down what crochet hook size I was using. I decided to do one totally different from the pattern, and this is the Island Stroll by Crocheted by Tess. It is an absolutely spectacular, gorgeous project, and I decided to use a different crochet hook size. Why did I do that? I don't know, but I did. And now I don't remember what it is. And it's going to take me some time to figure that out. And just because of that little inconvenience, it has just been sitting in a basket in my craft room, and I just feel so guilty every time I see it. I want to finish that project, but because I didn't have myself organized, I've created an obstacle. I feel like when we're crocheting blankets or anything else, if we create an obstacle for ourselves, like not being organized about what materials we're using, it makes it so much harder to make progress. So now I write down notes in my patterns, in little notebooks, in my notes app, anywhere that I want to remember something, I write it down now. I've heard some of you actually pin all the project information on your whips, and I think that is such a great idea. Or you keep everything organized in a big Ziploc bag or in a project bag, and you keep all of that information stored together. That is what I do now. Even if you think, yes, I'm going to remember it, there will be times that you won't. The next tip is for those of you who are making blankets and you have a lot of stitches in a row. For the Quinn blanket, they were short rows and you make strips of color and then you join them seamlessly together, which is genius. So I didn't have to use this tip. When you're working on a blanket and say you have 50, 100, 150, 200 stitches to keep track of, that can be very difficult, but I like to use stitch markers. By placing them every 20 or 50 stitches or so, I'm able to keep track of that section and know that, okay, if I marked every 20 stitches, all I need to do is count to 20. As long as I know that I've got 20 stitches there, we're all good. And it also helps to be able to keep track by counting up by 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. It's so much easier than trying to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You've gotten to the number 78 and then somebody walks in the room and they disturb you and you're like, no, I have to start all the way over. If you've marked your stitches every 20 or 50 stitches, you only have to go back that far. So that is one of the tips that I like to do, and I know a lot of you guys use that tip as well because it just makes sense. It can save you a lot of headaches and also anger towards family members who don't realize that you're counting. Yeah. It's a good one to do. The next tip is one that I learned from knitting, and it's called a lifeline. You place a lifeline in your work with knitting, and you know that at that point, everything was correct, your stitches were correct, your stitch count was correct, any of the pattern is all correct. And that way, if you keep working and then you find a mistake, you know that you only need to rip back to where the lifeline was. So for crocheting, what I've been doing is using just a stitch marker and placing it at that row. And that way, as I continue to work, if for some reason I get off on my stitch count or the pattern is incorrect, I've done something wrong, I know that I only need to rip back to that point. Whew, and that makes me feel so much better. I don't have to guess, when was the last time I checked? How do I know if I'm doing okay? Where was the point where I made the mistake? You will at least know I've checked this part, and then you can just periodically check your work and make sure you're right. Place the stitch marker at that row and keep on working. One thing that I found really helpful, especially when I was a beginner, but I still do this from time to time, is to mark the first and last stitches in a row. I just used little stitch markers and put them at the first stitch and the last stitch. And the reason why I do this is because the most likely places that you're going to lose a stitch is at the beginning of a row or at the end of a row. And those are both the places that can be the trickiest to know where that beginning stitch is and where that end stitch is. And by just placing little stitch markers there, I know, okay, here's my first stitch. I'll be able to keep working all the way to the end. My next tip is about weaving in ends. Don't wait till the end to weave in your ends, unless you're the kind of person who loves to save them up to the end and you just like to do them all at the same time. I get that. But for many of us, we leave those ends to weave in at the very end because we don't want to do it. And we're procrastinating and we just think, I'm not going to do it. I'll just wait and do it later. But that is one of the biggest ways that people end up not finishing a project, is because they know that they have to weave in so many ends. So for the Quinn blanket, I made myself stop after every strip of color and I I weaved in those ends. I'm not exactly sure how to say that, but at the end, I would weave in all of those ends. And that way I kept everything neat and tidy. And when I finished the blanket, I only had to weave in the ends for the border. And it just makes it feel so much better to know when you're done, you're done. An optional thing that you can do to finish off your blanket is to block it. Now, this isn't something that you probably will do for every single blanket, but it is something that can really polish off your blanket and take it to that next level. There are a few different ways that you can block your project, but my two favorite are wet blocking and steam blocking. One of the best things you can do if your blanket is made with natural fibers like cotton or wool or alpaca or something else that is a natural fiber is to wet block it in a gentle detergent. The reason why you might want to do this, especially if you're using a yarn that has wool in it, is that wool will bloom in water. You'll really get to see all of the properties that wool have after you've soaked it in water, and then you carefully take it out, squeeze it a little bit, get a towel and wring out all of the excess water. And then you just lay it flat, whether you have blocking mats or you can lay it on the floor or on a bed, and just shape the blanket into a perfect rectangle or a square and let it dry. The other way that you can block is to just spray with a spray bottle, and that way you don't completely soak it, but the fibers absorb all of the water and it makes it where you can shape it easily. And what it does is it takes out all of those bumps and wrinkles and all those things and makes it really smooth and uniform. And finally, another way is to steam block. I have just a little steamer that I got off of Amazon. It uses heat to block all of the fibers and get everything nice and neat. Steam blocking is great when you're using acrylic fibers because they need a little bit of heat to be able to shape them properly. Another way that you can block, especially granny squares, is with little granny square blockers, but you can make this at home as well. I have one and it's wooden, and you can spritz the little squares, or you can just place them in there and let the natural stretch of the little pegs shape the squares. I have a set of blocking mats that I really like. They're just foam mats and they fit all together so you can use smaller projects or larger projects, and it comes with stainless steel rust-proof pins. You definitely want rust-proof pins because, especially if you are doing any kind of blocking with water, if they're not rust-proof, they can potentially rust, and if that gets on your project, that's not a fun thing to try to get out. So I'll link my favorite blocking mats in the description box below for you. I hope you enjoyed all of these crocheted blanket tips, and make sure to get your 1 month free trial to Skillshare by clicking the link in the description box below. But also make sure to let me know what your favorite crochet blanket tips are. I always look forward to hearing from you guys, and I hope you all stay safe out there and happy stitching.